Okay, thank you. So my name is Kelly Tuttle. I am the cataloger for the Manuscripts of the Muslim World project. And with me is Emma Thomson, who is the project manager for Digital Scriptorium 2.0. But before that, she was the project coordinator for the Schoenberg database of manuscripts, which is what we'll be talking about today. So that's why she's with me. As I said, I'm the project cataloger for the Manuscripts of the Muslim World. It is a project that is cataloging and digitizing Islamic manuscripts at the University of Pennsylvania, the Free Library of Philadelphia, the Columbia University, and some other repositories in and around the Philadelphia area. The project is housed at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, which is housed at the University of Pennsylvania Library. Sorry, I'm trying to get, there we go. I finally got my Zoom thing to cooperate. All right, I'm putting in the chat a couple of links about the Schoenberg Institute if you are not familiar with it. But the SIMS, as we call it for short, works to bring manuscript culture, modern technology, and people together to provide access to and understanding of our intellectual heritage locally and around the world. And the links that I just put in there, one is to the Schoenberg Institute, and the other one is to the teaching website that we keep, where we put teaching and learning resources having to do with manuscripts. So SIMS in general has been trying to get more non-Western representation into their programming and also into the Schoenberg database of manuscripts, which is what Emma will be talking about. And I'm just going to put a link to the database into the chat so that you can have a look at it if you would like. All of the data from the Manuscripts of the Muslim World project, for example, will be ingested into the Schoenberg database at the end of the project, which will, of course, help get more non-Western materials into the database, but it is an ongoing effort that we would like to continue. While the Manuscripts of the Muslim World project has been going on, and I've been contacting repositories in and around Philly, asking them if they have any Islamic manuscripts that we could digitize and catalog as part of the project, I got to thinking that it would be very nice to have a searchable list of Islamic manuscripts in North America. And so SIMS therefore put in a grant application to create what we're calling the North American Census of Islamic Manuscripts, NASIM, which will be hosted on the Schoenberg database and will, we hope, include as many of the public and private collections as possible in North America. If the project is funded, then there will be staff dedicated to finding the collections, gathering the data, and ingesting it into the database. The staff will also include one person who's dedicated to working on the UCLA manuscript collection, which would be wonderful because then it would be searchable by anyone, anywhere, without resorting to the PDF of the catalog. Regardless of whether the NASIM project is funded, though, we would like to encourage your participation in adding data to the Schoenberg database. The database stores observations of manuscripts, including sales, purchases, catalog accounts, any kind of history of the manuscript. And it can be used for provenance research, obviously, to sort of drill down into the particular history of one manuscript, but also to see larger trends of manuscript trade and sale. Your imagination really is the limit of what you can do with it. As soon as you look at the data, you can start to think of questions that you could possibly answer using that data, and it is all freely and openly available to any researcher. For those of you who are catalogers, though, you may be thinking, that's great, it's another database, but I really don't want to have to update our records in yet another place. But no, I did not mean to share my screen, by the way, because Emma will be showing the, the database and how it works. So no worries, that's coming up soon. Anyway, for catalogers, once you have put in your data, then you have created an observation of the manuscript, and then that's it. So you wouldn't have to update anything beyond putting in an initial data set. Let's say that in 2020, you have uploaded a data set, and then in 2025, someone comes along and makes a discovery about one of your manuscripts. That person who makes a discovery can put in a personal observation and that would continue the history of that manuscript. So this is what Emma will be showing you in her part of the talk. But before I turn it over to her, I'd like to conclude my little section by saying that if you have a way of getting your Islamic manuscript data to SIMS, that can be in MARC format, in XML, in a CSV, or if there's sort of a way for an outsider to come in and gather your data, I would love to know about it. We would love to know about it as SIMS, so that we can begin putting more non-Western material into the database. As I said at the beginning, this database, it is useful, but it is still heavily Western manuscript focused, and we'd really like to work on creating a better balance of representation. So you can contact me directly with any questions about it. I'm putting my email in the chat for you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Emma, who will take you through the database and a little bit of history about it and how to work with it as a participant. Emma.
Thanks, Kelly, and thank you, Robin, for organizing this session, and thanks to all of you for coming today. I'm so excited to speak to you about the Schoenberg database, and I hope that you all will create user accounts at the end of this presentation. So as Kelly said, my name is Emma Thomson. I work at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, and until August of this year, I was the project coordinator for the Schoenberg database of manuscripts, which you are looking at the homepage of that database on this slide. The Schoenberg database is an open access crowdsourced database that captures descriptions of manuscripts as they appear in various sources over time. It continuously aggregates and updates observations of pre-modern manuscripts from over 14,000 different sources, including auction and sale catalogs, collection catalogs, blog posts, newspaper articles, any source that talks about a manuscript, we can turn that information into searchable data. And we are up to nearly 250,000 observations of pre-modern manuscripts. I do want to emphasize that our name is somewhat of a misnomer. We are the Schoenberg database of manuscripts, but please understand that we are a database of observations about manuscripts. We hardly ever are actually looking at a physical object when we're creating data, because we're transcribing data from secondary sources like catalogs. And we are also able to ingest data from spreadsheets, and our users can create their own observations about manuscripts based on their own knowledge as well. So this is very important to keep in mind when you're searching the database. And just, I wanted to provide a little bit about our history. The Schoenberg database was started as a personal project of Larry Schoenberg, who you see on the screen here. He was a Penn alum and a computer scientist, and he was collecting manuscripts as a private citizen. And he noticed that no one was keeping track of all of the information that was being published about manuscripts in sale catalogs. And he wanted to track that information, and also especially to track changes in prices over time as manuscripts kept appearing on the market and their prices kept changing. So he initially focused on creating this database to store data about auction and sale information. And this does remain the core strength of the database. We have data on the majority of manuscript sales that have occurred in British and American markets from the 19th century up until today. Larry was very ambitious, though, in his efforts, and with the help of his wife, Barbara, who you also see here, they amassed a huge amount of data that became useful not just for tracking price changes, but also for studying provenance and changes in scholarship over time. And as the database grew and grew, more and more people started using it, besides just Larry and Barbara. And eventually, we needed to get it properly managed by professionals and supported by an institution. So Larry gave his database to Penn in 2005. And in 2014, we received an NEH grant to transform it into a crowdsourced and community-driven platform, sort of like a Wikipedia for manuscripts. And it's now supported by Penn staff and a very active user community. And we continue to grow and add data every single day. And I also want to say that though the scope of the database was initially focused on Western manuscripts, in the European markets. Our scope has expanded and we are global in scope now. We're interested in manuscripts produced anywhere as a part of manuscript culture. And the database does come with some caveats that are very important to keep in mind. And the first one especially is important, that we are not making any claims of right or wrong data. We are just ingesting data from any source that describes manuscripts. So we are not making any claims about the truthfulness of the information. This is especially important when you're considering auction catalogs that are trying to sell things and make claims about manuscripts that might be a little unlikely, especially with regards to provenance and artistic contributions. So we don't make any claims of objectivity in the data. We're just transcribing the information as it appears in sources, and then the user community can judge the quality of those sources for themselves. The second major caveat is that our data is messy. This started as an Excel file at someone's house 20 years ago, and there were no authority files or content standards of any kind until about 15 years into the project. So we do have a lot of legacy data that is not necessarily trustworthy as far as current data standards are concerned. So as you're searching the database and you come upon records that have a red warning flag at the top, that means that they were added many, many years ago. They may not reflect current data standards. So just something to be aware of as you're browsing the database. This is a diagram of how we organize our information in the database. And it's pretty simple. There are three main record types: sources, entries, and manuscript records. Source records store data about the source of the information, so about catalogs or whatever the source of the information is from. And you'll see in a source record that we look at in a minute, it'll have information about when it was published, the source's title, what collection it's describing, things like that. Then we have entry records, and these are the core records of the database. Entries are a single description of a manuscript in a source. So sources can have one or many entries attached to them. And then as the same manuscript appears in different sources over time, it will have many different entries about it, many different observations about the same manuscript. And we link those entries together for easy reference via the manuscript record. But I want to emphasize that the manuscript record is just a linking node. It doesn't have any unique data itself. It's simply the way that we link entries together. And when you're browsing the database, what you'll be browsing and searching for are entries, which are observations, not necessarily specific manuscripts. So let's look at some records now.
Emma, you've got 5 minutes.
Thanks. So this is a source record, and you can see here, this is the data about it. It's a collection catalog. It was published in 2006. And its title is Transformation of Knowledge. This was Larry Schoenberg's personal collection catalog. And you'll see here we have a name authority record for Larry. This is a controlled field. If you click on this gray link here, you would open up a name record. We'll look at one of those in a second. And we also have links to all 164 entries from this catalog. Now let's look at an entry. So again, at the top, you'll see here, this link would link back to the record we were just looking at, the source record for Larry's catalog. But this is the entry. So this is the core record type of the database. This is about his catalog number 426. It's an Avicenna manuscript. And you see we have some descriptive information here, what language it's in, folio, the size. We have provenance information, and all of the hyperlinked fields here, these are all linking to controlled fields, authority files, things like that. I just want to show you Avicenna's authority file here. So if we clicked on this name here, we would get to this record. And this is Avicenna's name authority record in the Schoenberg database. We do link to VIAF when it's available, but that's only possible for about 30% of the names that we have in the database, because we store authority records for scribes, artists, provenance agents that may not appear in other library catalogs. We also have his life dates, and we link him to places where he was associated with, and you can have multiple places here if we knew other places that he worked at or lived in. And yeah, so that's the name authority record. And this is a great opportunity for this community to help us. As Kelly mentioned, the database is really focused on Western manuscripts and their production at the moment. So we really need help adding information about non-Western persons and places associated with manuscripts. So now we're looking at the manuscript record. And remember, this is the linking node that links together observations about the same manuscript as they appear over time. On the far right of this image here, this is that entry we were just looking at, Larry's catalog number 426. And you can see here we have two other entries that are more recent. Data about this manuscript. This one here is coming from a 2018 Penn record. This manuscript is now at the University of Pennsylvania, and you can see the information differs a bit because this manuscript has been recatalogued since 2006. And then if we look over here, we have the most recent entry, which comes from 2019, and it doesn't have a lot of data in it, and that's fine. When you're creating data in the Schoenberg database, we don't have hardly any required fields. So if you're adding information based on your personal knowledge, you don't have to recreate a whole rich, detailed record about the manuscript. You can just contribute the specific data points that you want to contribute. So let's look at this, this last entry here. This was actually created by Kelly. So we're looking at her handiwork here, and this is a personal observation. So anyone here could create a user account and create something like this. And all Kelly did was tell us a former owner that hadn't been noticed in the other descriptions of this manuscript. So this owner has an ownership stamp in red ink in the manuscript. So Kelly created this observation to tell us that she created an authority file for this person. And now this entry is linked up to all of the other entries about this manuscript. And you can see that we're building a more complete understanding of the manuscript itself. And we also have the ability to ingest data. So we have a CSV template that you can download and fill out. And it's an easy way to create a bunch of entries all at once rather than manually typing in a bunch of data by hand, which can take a really long time. So this record was imported via CSV file. It's based off of an OCLC record. And what's important to notice here is that the database is published in Unicode UTF-8. So we do have the ability to store and search on non-Western scripts. So Kelly added the Arabic title here, and you can search on this as well in Arabic in the database, but we don't have a lot of this data yet. So we really need the community's help to add these special script types to the database.
Emma, can you wrap up, please?
Yep. So this is my last slide, and I just want to say I hope you all will create an account, and you can do all sorts of stuff. You can add new data, you can download the whole data set and do with it what you will. And so thanks, and I will pass the screen over to Joy now.
Hi, so my name is Joy Amina Garnett. I'm the granddaughter of Ahmed Zeki Abushady, the Egyptian Romantic poet, who may be known to some of you. And this story started a very long time ago for me, but not in any clear or substantive way. I grew up in a suburb of New York City, and I'm the youngest. I'm the daughter of the youngest child of Abushady, Huda, and it's the theme running through my talk will be the kind of hermetically sealed Chinese boxes aspect of families, because they and the story, the narrative that I'm about to weave for you was almost entirely drawn from the objects and materials in this archive, as I discovered and tried to preserve the materials. I am thrilled and kind of still apoplectic over the fact that NYU Abu Dhabi just acquired this archive that I had been working on for a decade. And the press release about that acquisition was released at the end of September. There's no way for me not to get emotional about this as I talk about it to you. I've never actually told the story of the discovery of the archive, although I've written many things about Abushady as I discovered them, things about my grandfather that are not actually in the literature, because the literature around him is mostly about Arabic, modern Arabic literature. And he was a sort of polymath and modernist in so many other senses, and a scientist. So part of my intuition about unearthing these materials included a desire to tease out these other narratives. And so what I'm giving you is just one. It's just my personal narrative based on this material. But before I get into it, I'd like to thank a few people, just because some of you are in this audience, I believe. I'd like to thank Robin, first of all, for inviting me to talk, but also for, over the years, for your moral support in this archive fever that seems to have extended for years. Robin actually discovered Abushady's beekeeping journals and acquired them for the UPenn Library years before we ever met. Enormous thanks to Bradley Bauer and Guy Barak at NYU for making this happen in a pandemic, in a global pandemic. I actually don't know how, but amazing. Huge thanks to Arthur Fournier, who is my strategic archive aficionado and rare book human, who worked with me for many years on this archive and helped me do the inventory on a box and folder level so that we could actually transfer it to an institution. I don't know how to thank you. And many other people, the people who introduced us, and obviously this sort of thing, since I'm an independent agent, to make it accessible in an institutional setting requires a large network of people. Okay. Oh, and just as a coda to that, this is me in Long Island City, Queens, as we handed off the archive to the shippers. And that's what was wrapped. This is Abushady as a young man. Most of you who are aware of Abushady know him as the poet, the modern romantic poet, modernist romantic poet who launched Apollo, which was the seminal experimental journal that launched many poets, many young poets who had never been published before, alongside some rather lofty names. And yet he was many other things. I'm going to just give you a little background story. Annie, he was married to Annie Bamford, my grandmother. For many years they lived in sin. They met apparently, according to apocryphal family stories, on a London bus. Who knows? He was in England for 10 years. He received his license for medicine from the University of London and became a bacteriologist and was interested in bees. And I don't know when that occurred. This is the house in Ealing that he lived in with Annie. On either side of the gate are his shingle, which is also now in the collection. Actually, just by the way, all of these materials I'm showing you are in the collection at Abu Dhabi now. Over the door is a tiny plate that says Ramses Villa. So I have a sense of my grandparents as having been hoarders. My grandmother loved antiques. This is the backyard. This is the earliest photograph I have of them together. It's dated 1917, and it's the earliest photograph I have, or that Abu Dhabi has, of Abushady with a beehive. Sorry, there. You can see in the window surgery laboratory above Annie's head. They apparently liked kitties, and there's a turtle on the walk. Anyway, I was amazed to find that. So Abushady in England is a very interesting story. It's a decade-long story. He established with Annie in Benson. They moved from Ealing to Benson to a farmhouse in Oxfordshire. He established something called the Apis Club, which was a cooperative. Annie, who you see here, and their little fox terrier Fahmi. Annie, I mean, she looks like she popped straight out of Tolstoy, doesn't she? And here's Abushady Zaki looking very Edwardian, and they cut a very peculiar couple, I believe. But she comes from a long line of cotton weavers and labor organizers. She was proud of the, I think, fact, but I really don't know if it's a fact. She claims to have in her lineage Samuel Bamford, who is a famous labor organizer who wrote Passages in the Life of a Radical, who was also a poet and wrote poetry in the Lancashire dialect. So she's from Lancashire, Cheshire, actually. And she comes from a town, Stalybridge, a family of 12, that was very near Rochdale, which is the birthplace of the Rochdale pioneers, which is where we get cooperatives from. That is the birth of the modern cooperative was in Rochdale. And I can't help but think that Abushady was influenced by her. And when he founded the Apis Club, he did so on this model of the cooperative. When I was growing up, I thought my mother had a few beehives in the backyard. There were photographs of her as a toddler holding a smoker and grinning next to a white boxy beehive. And I thought this was a hobby. I had no idea that it was a vast scheme. The Apis Club project that Abushady launched included classrooms. He had glass lantern slides from which he taught best practices in beekeeping. He published best practices standards, which you can find. They're out there in WorldCat. There's one dated 1922, and I believe that one's in the Ateel Library. Bee World, he launched in 1919, the Bee World. It's now Bee World. It's still published by IBRA, the International Bee Research Association out of Cardiff. And the Apis Club archives are strangely held in the National Library of Wales, along with these lantern slides. I went there, I couldn't get them to unearth the lantern slides. There are apparently thousands of them. Please someone go to Aberystwyth and find them. Anyway, he was called back to Egypt, having established himself in England, having established this cooperative, which had upwards of 600 hives and something like 23,000 subscribers that kept it alive and liquid. He had 4 patents with the British Patent Office for beehive improvements, including a queen rearing cage, I think it's called, and this very prominent patent, which was for an aluminum removable honeycomb, which would allow you to extract honey without destroying the hive. It was not the first removable honeycomb, but it was the first aluminum removable honeycomb. The photograph of him is later in Egypt holding it. This is him in Benson in the apiary, which these are tiny little photographs. And this is him pontificating, obviously, about probably bees to this very shocked looking man in a hat and cane. Annie and Zaki finally got married because he was called back to Egypt. He was guilted into returning to Egypt by his father. They left in 1922. Presumably they got married so that they could get papers and a visa for Annie. I don't think they really cared about that sort of thing or whatever. I discovered a lot of papers pertaining to this passage. He had a lot of things, they had a lot of things that we will never see. Only a few things made it from England to Egypt. His manuscripts, his books did not make it. They were held in Egyptian customs. He never got them back. There were antiques, there were carpets, there were paintings. We have a few of those, but the majority were sold to benefit the Apis Club, which was going through some financial straits. This is just funny, and I'm putting it here because apparently it was very difficult then to get certificate from a vet to take a dog from England to Egypt, but they did. This is Abushady's father, Muhammad Abushady Bey, who was apparently a very difficult and domineering figure in his life, and a Supreme Court judge, a frightening defense lawyer, friend of Zad Zaghloul, member of the Wafd, a player. There is one book in the collection that is a kind of biography of him. Here he is with some colleagues. Looks like the Mokattam Hills to me, I don't know. But he pulled Abushady back to Egypt. He had friends send letters to shame him. He claimed to be in ill health. I mean, Abushady, after all, he had missed a couple of revolutions there. Anyway, they went back. Here they are in Egypt. And they raised a family. And 8 years after returning to Egypt, and I don't know really what went on during those 8 years, except I know he was appointed to different hospitals in various cities, very peripatetic. But 8 years later, he established the, excuse me, the Egyptian version of the Apis Club, which he called the Bee Kingdom, which was to serve Egyptian beekeepers the same way he envisioned the Apis Club. The Apis Club, the thing that I didn't emphasize was that his idea was to use this model of cooperative to kind of level the playing field between different classes of people of different educations and to educate them in beekeeping, which for him, and I think for most beekeepers, is a kind of idealistic endeavor. And for him also a poetic endeavor, as well as a scientific endeavor. He brought together various government officials to start a beekeeping committee for reforms. I mean, up until that time in Egypt, beekeeping was, beehives were skeps. If you're familiar with the cartoon, you know, beehive, it's like an upside down basket. And to extract honey, which was valuable, you had to destroy the hive. So his aluminum removable honeycomb and standardized beekeeping beehives, boxy beehives, Langstroth hive, were integral to this. And in instituting this in the countryside was a project of his. He got underwriting from the government. He apparently was invited by King Fuad to launch a royal apiary. There's some evidence of this in the archive. He started a journal like the Bee World, but bilingual in Arabic and English, international. He took in advertising, and the New York Public Library actually was a subscriber. It only ran for 8 years, up until 1938. And almost the full run is in NYPL, if anyone happens to be in New York and wants to get it, you have to request it, it's offsite. But it's almost all there. Here is the Bee Kingdom League on the roof of, I believe this is in Matarea, where he lived with my family for a while. The little kid is my Uncle Ramsey. Here is the Bee Kingdom League on the steps of their last headquarters in Alexandria, which is where my mother grew up, really from 1935 till they left in 46, right after the war. So that house is an enormous repository of archival materials, was an enormous repository. So to have a family archive, you have to have a family that is, that has some hoarders, we have that. And you need a place to hoard stuff. And so most of it was brought to the US from this house in large trunks. I have the date at the bottom there, 1946 to 75, because I found out later on that the Bee Kingdom League continued to meet after Abushady left Egypt, and after his death in 1955, they continued to meet in this house on the Rue Menashe, Sherry Menashe. This is it when he found it. The story goes, and once again apocryphal, that it was very cheap to rent. Well, that part is true, because it was haunted, because its previous owner, Aziz Bichet, was murdered in his bed. So that's a great story. I hope it's true, I guess. It was kind of, as you can see, weedy when he found it. I did a lot of triangulating with snapshots of my mother and aunt on the roof and whatever was behind them. My mother said she grew up near Waburamaya, the waterworks, Alexandria Waterworks. I found this old map. The street names are all changed, so it was great to find this old map, to find Shara Menashe and Miden, Waburamaya, and the waterworks here. I believe their house was on this corner, or maybe it took up the block. Apparently, from the roof, you could watch for free the soccer matches, or I guess football matches, taking place across the way. And here's a Google map. And that's the Villa Rollo there, which one can see in the snapshots from their roof. So I believe this is where it was. By the time I got to Egypt in the 80s, it had already been knocked down. So that was kind of a drag. Here's Abushady on the left in the backyard with some beehives and plantings for the bees and the family in Alexandria with their private beehives. Here's the house after he fixed it up. A photo session from across the street. The interesting thing about this photograph is that I grew up looking at it and it was tiny. It wasn't until my mother started blowing up snapshots and hanging them in frames around the house that I realized that on either side of the gate, and this is before I knew what the Bee Kingdom was. Well, here's Abushady posing on the stair with the Bee Kingdom, but that on either side of the gate were signs, the Bee Kingdom in Arabic and English, and also to help triangulating. On the corner is the sign, the Bee Kingdom, and you can see through the gate to a gate on the other side. So I believe they're on the corner. This is the
5
side
minutes.
yard. 5 minutes, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, look at this. This is a parcel of land in Khorshed in the Delta where Abushady kept bees. And once again, the Bee Kingdom sign. These are the three hoarders, a little older. Aunt Sophia was the eldest and the last to pass away. And it was her, I'll just flip through this. This is them as adults. It was she who really kept materials and hoarded them. They all argued over duplicate photographs and whatnot, but she kept things, and she kept things from me, even knowing that I was trying to pull things together and maybe write a book. This is the archive in my apartment as in its current form, more or less. But before I was able to pull it out of her apartment and my mother's, it was just a pile of stuff in different rooms and basements and closets and file cabinets. What gave me a hint that there was more than I knew about was my mother's sewing room. After she passed away in 2011, I found things like this, 48 of these calligraphies by Sayyid Ibrahim, a calligrapher who was part of the Apollo circle of my grandfather's. These were the originals for the illustrations that he placed in his journals. Drawings for poetry, please mail to Sophia. Well, happily, my mother didn't mail them to Sophia, so they were easily found. This was Safea's study that met me when I had to go and start to sort through things and try and rescue them. So as you can see, there was a lot of work to do. I don't know if you can tell, but here and here are two Wanley paintings. So I knew that there was artwork. There were cabinets and books and albums and suitcases in her hallway that I went through. This little leather valise actually had a tag, and I guess was brought along on the passage on the SS Vulcania in 1946. My grandfather kept a ship's log. It was soon after the war. Inside these various suitcases were letters that I was told had been shredded by my aunt, and they hadn't been. And there includes correspondence and love letters and ephemera of all kinds, snapshots. He was obsessive in his collation of correspondence and kept carbon copies of everything he wrote. So there is correspondence to and from. Munir Ramzi, I might have to end with Munir Ramzi, was a poet, a student who, along with Safea, the soon-to-be celebrated novelist Edouard El-Kharat, and Professor Mustafa Badawi, who will be known to any of you who've studied modern Arabic literature, they ran together as a little group. But what I didn't know was that, and this was the book that Edouard and Mustafa published in 1996 of Munir's poetry, what I didn't know is that Munir and my Aunt Safea were an item, and it was a secret. And she left and left him behind, went to America, and he shot himself in the head. And this is her guilty confession book, which is filled with photographs, poetry that they exchanged. Here's a photograph of Munir, Badawi, and Kharat in their younger days.
I hate to
this
interrupt
is the
this.
end. We can just end on Safea and Munir, and that's just scratching the surface. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our fabulous presenters. I've clapped hands here. I just hate to interrupt this story, and I know that Joy has much more to tell us about the story of this collection and her interactions with it. I want to thank all our fabulous presenters, Ioana and Emma and Kelly and Joy. And now it is time for your questions. So you should be able to unmute yourselves. I did harvest one question out of the chat for Ioana, but maybe I'll give everybody I'll start with that one because I already have it, and then everyone can sort of gather their wool of thinking and for questions. And so we will go till about 12:30 with our question time. So Ioana, the question that I have for you is from Arthur Decker, who is new to MELA, as are many people here. And by the way, welcome to everyone who is here in the room today who is new to MELA. You are all welcome, and we're delighted to have you. So Arthur asks for Ioana about the Arabic liturgical books. So he asks, were these the first printed Arabic liturgical books for the Orthodox in the Patriarchate of Antioch? And did Jerusalem also get some Arabic books originating from Romania?
Right, so yes, these were the first printed Arabic liturgical books for the Orthodox in the Patriarchate of Antioch. Only you have to recall that they were not called Orthodox at the time because the Patriarchate of Antioch until 1724 did not separate in a Greek Orthodox Church and a Catholic Church. That only happened when Athanasius the Abbas died, 1724. So they would be Byzantine Rite Christians, and they didn't have any printed material that they could use in church services. So the answer is yes, basically. As for the second question, what exactly do you mean by Jerusalem? If you mean the Greek patriarchate, the Greek Orthodox patriarchate, they would be Greek speaking, most of them, and they had very strong connections with the Romanian principalities, and they founded presses, Greek presses in Iași and Bucharest and Târgoviște and other places to get Greek books into Jerusalem and the surrounding areas. We do not have information on the Arabic books that would be used by Arabic-speaking Orthodox Christians in and around Jerusalem. This is one of the topics that we plan on covering, and we can only look at the ownership marks and notes and such information that is on the particular items that we would find in libraries all over the world, actually.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Ioana. So more questions, and please just go ahead and jump in. Oh, wait, here, Jake has another question for Ioana. He says he's curious about the type of paper and bindings of the volumes you showed. One shot showed what looked like pamphlet stitching.
There is a website on the, there's a link on the website of the Romanian Academy Library, where they show a lot of bindings from medieval times. There were a lot of workshops in Romania for bindings. I'm not sure that what is pamphlet stitching, but stitching definitely you can find there pictures of stitchings of covers. And if you write to me, I think my email is somewhere in the system. I can give you the link and maybe put you in contact with people who have participated in that. It was an international project with the people from France, the Arles, I think, Center for book conservation or something like that. So it's something that would give you more information. I'm not a specialist in bindings. As for paper was reused from manuscript paper. We are looking into the filigrees as well. Paper would come from the West, Rome, Venice, that sort of that part of the world, maybe Vienna, but it's a totally different story. And if you are a specialist in filigrees, I would ask you some questions about a very interesting topic of an unknown Arabic akathistos of the Mother of God that has some filigrees that we could work with to identify the printer and the press. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ioana. And
Robin?
yes, Ed, go ahead.
I had to step away when Ioana was speaking because I was trying to get a book, but unfortunately it was buried. I have to add a clarification to what Ioana was saying. There was in fact printing of liturgical books in Arabic in Syria, Lebanon, in the late 1700s, early 1800s. I have one of those books myself. It is a gospel, a set of gospels for the Mass for the one, I forget which rite it is for the church at Antioch. And it's the edition that I have is not mentioned in Graph. Other editions are mentioned in Graph.
Can I?
But there was a press in Syria, Lebanon, in a monastery.
Well, could you be more specific about the year? Because I know there were presses later than 1727. There was a press. So what time are we speaking about?
The edition that I have is about 1810 or so, maybe 1820.
Well,
But there were
obviously.
earlier editions that were published in the late 1700s
Yes.
by that same press. Unfortunately, my book is buried, and I don't want to take the time to run over there and, you know, try to unbury it right now.
So
but
Robin, can I answer briefly?
Yes, please go ahead. Yes, briefly.
I was speaking today about books printed between 1701 and 1747. There are later editions of the same books printed in Beirut after 1750, and later on during that century, before the American press came to Beirut and other Western presses were established there. But the first press in the Middle East to print in Arabic with Arabic types, because we have Arabic in Syriac types in Koshaya much earlier for one book. The first press was Aleppo, 1706. So that's the period that I'm firstly studying. But we are looking at books until the year, our limit is 1800. So I would be very interested in your personal assets. That is a very interesting thing because they are very rare. So take good care of it. Thank you, Robin.
Sure thing. Any other questions for our other wonderful presenters? And please just unmute yourself and jump in, or you can put it in the chat.
My microphone is still on. Am I allowed to ask it like this, or you want me to write it in the
No,
chat?
as you like. You wanna go ahead and ask.
So I meant to ask about the project at the Library of the University of Pennsylvania. You speak about Islamic manuscripts, but my experience and from what I've seen in general, you could get mixed collections. Like you have collections of Islamic poetry together with a few Christian prayers, or such collections that were put together for various reasons. So do you stop at Christian Arabic material? Do you leave it aside? Or is it like in the world of Islamic manuscripts of our friend Jeffrey Roper, where collections were mentioned even if they held Christian material, which is very helpful for me personally and for the people who are working with Christian Arabic manuscripts. We find them in his beautiful 4-volume World of Islamic Manuscripts. So what about the Christian ones?
Yeah, they're in the project. There's no differentiation really between religions. It's mostly a language differentiation because they had to set the border somewhere just for the project. So there are actually some Coptic material that made it into the project too, but that's because most of them have Arabic in there also. And so for that, they kind of got swept in. There's also Syriac. So there's nothing, I mean, it's not Islamic in the sense of having to do with the religion. It's more like Islamicate, meaning the larger area of production. So.
Okay, thank you.
But I would just add that really anything can go into the Schoenberg database of manuscripts, because so if you want to add anything to that, we would welcome it from anywhere, any kind of manuscript, any language.
Thank you. I will have my personal account soon with you. So, thank you.
And further questions, please. I think everybody's blown away because the presentations were really amazing. So Joy, I actually have a question for you. Moving from a family archive to a vendor, especially a vendor of fine books, as he is his slogan. Can you tell us just a little bit more about how that connection was made and just how that went?
Arthur Fournier and myself, you mean?
Yeah, yes.
Well,
Hi, Joy.
interestingly,
I think Arthur's here, so he just said hi.
Arthur is here, and the person who introduced us is a scholar, Egyptian scholar named Hussein Omar, and it was Hussein who is responsible. Well, he is one of those people who can see that connections should be made, and then he actually makes the connections. So we were both present in 2013 at a going away party in the West Village of New York City for Hussein. And he invited us both. And toward the end of the party, when we were all kind of trashed, he introduced us and said, "Oh my God, I think I just figured out who you need to meet each other." And then from 2013, every month or so, Arthur and I would meet somewhere in Brooklyn over sandwiches or a pint and discuss what I had to do with this archive. There's a kind of backstory which Arthur didn't know, which it took me a while to realize, which is that, and something I didn't say, which is that I'm a visual artist and creative writer. I'm not obviously an academic, but I worked for many years in a library, in an art library in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Robert Goldwater Library, and we used to acquire facsimiles and codices from a guy that Arthur worked with. And so we almost could have met a decade earlier, but so there was, the fates were working.
Joy, I just want to repeat again what a pleasure it was to work with you on this collection, and it was. I think we just had a really just a good sense of fit about a mission for making sure that these materials could be, I guess, assessed without implying an order, kind of kept together as kind of a constellation of materials, or almost like a site of that should be preserved for the production of new knowledge around Abushady's legacy and the different narratives and kind of social movements that were represented within the archive. Robin, I just wanted to mention briefly too, yes, my name says Arthur Fournier Fine and Rare. That was a hasty decision to call myself that about 8 years ago. I have moved very much from fine books into almost exclusively, but or most passionately, I'll say, the preservation and placement of archives. So large groups of materials and collections that I believe shouldn't be prized apart and cracked into little pieces. I try to find a good sense of fit between individuals like Joy and institutions like the Beinecke, like NYU Abu Dhabi, like other institutions that are equipped to take on these collections, make them discoverable, make them accessible, and to preserve them physically.
Yeah, our loss is New York, NYU, Abu Dhabi's gain. There was a question in the chat, where is the collection now? So I'll let you answer that.
Joy?
Sorry, me. Oh, so the collection was acquired by NYU in Abu Dhabi, and it actually, you saw that little picture of me in my N95 mask in Queens holding the bubble wrapped portrait of Abushady, taken by Arthur with his iPhone, I must say, great. But that was in May, and we shipped it off, and it is there in the special collections of the NYU Abu Dhabi Library. And that is very extraordinary to me. I can't believe it. Every time I say it.
I think his name is, but Bradley Bauer is the librarian who acquired the collection, and I think is the responsible party now if people have questions about accessing the archive.
Yeah, and I believe Bradley's here too. Brad, do you want to?
I'll just briefly say a word of thanks. I think Robin put it well in her chat comments a little bit earlier about it takes a village to maintain and preserve an archive. And I think that's so true on so many different levels. And so there's several people I see in this call. Guy Barak is here as well. And he was the one that alerted me that there was this possibility. And I'll just say that we're trying to redo our own website so that we can make some of the information more readily available. Once we do get the collection processed, as far as fully cataloged on our end, building on the work that Arthur and Joy started, we'll have a finding aid up online through NYU Libraries portal for their own archival finding aids. So we're working on ways to get the word out, but I'm really looking forward to working with it. And in the small world department, I have to say, I used to live in Alexandria, Virginia before I came here. And I discovered unpacking the collection that Joy's Aunt Sophia probably lived only a couple of miles away from where I did. I recognized her address, so here we are.
Oh my God. Okay, that's crazy. I love small world.
And
Yes,
I also,
we'll put that in the mental Rolodex.
I'm glad that Guy Barak is on this call too, and I'm glad that Bradley mentioned that it was Guy who really did, you know, the thinking to make sure that Bradley and I became connected, because that wouldn't have happened without Guy's intercession. So we were very thankful for the interest. Yes, I mean, the sense that there's a community of individuals who are interested, even if it might not have been coming directly to their institutional hold. Everyone, I think, who found out about this archive through MELA and through the network of librarians which are associated with MELA, thought collaboratively about where it could find a home, and that was really wonderful to see that. So it really impressed me with the social fabric of this community.
The social fabric. And I'd like to add that I was really hoping to keep the collection together in one piece, and we did, and you acquired it, Brad, as one thing. And because it was worrisome to me that it was so diverse, and you know, should the photographs go to a photo archive? Should the manuscripts go to a special collection in the library? What will we do with these small artworks and ephemera that don't fit categories? But it's all together. It makes sense together, that it all connects. And in the project of Abushady, of having things that may seem unrelated to others, it pulls those things together and appears, it manifests his vision and his project as taking these things and showing the connections between them rather than separating them.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful for that.
And we have like just 1 minute left, but Joy, would you also tell us just very briefly too about your artistic engagements with this collection before you finally let it go? Because you did some very interesting artistic things that I didn't quite understand all of, but you know, with your collection. So just very briefly.
Thank you. Okay, briefly, because the collection is so visually rich, I was very tentative about, I mean, I'm trained as a visual artist, I'm trained as a painter. I thought and still think that probably the best way for me to attack and parse these narratives is through creative writing, which is what I'm doing. But initially I was trying to pull images and create a kind of collages. I think that it's a difficult thing for any artist to do. I've seen other artists do it. I've seen other artists of Middle Eastern descent try and pull from their family archives. Some of them are famous, and to create conceptual visual projects. I think we all almost always fail because the materials themselves are so evocative and have their own rich internal connections with other things that we try and pull them out of those contexts and make them our own artwork. In a way, we lose those connections. We try and create new connections. They're never as evocative as the historical connections. But I think this is okay to fail. I think it's okay to do that. I think that's part of the project of being a visual artist, is to try and do things that then fail, and those failures are interesting. So I think that my visual projects that have to do with the archive are really interesting failures, and some of them I like. So.
That's wonderful, Joy. So we are now at time, and I really am very grateful to all of you for joining us this morning. We have half an hour before the next session begins, and I would like everyone to have a real break because we are all quite weary of Zooming all day long. So thank you again to all of our fabulous presenters. Very, very interesting topics and presentations. I'm very grateful to you all. And I'll see you, many of you, in about a half an hour. And thank you again. Okay, bye for now.